You can take your seats. And welcome to the November meeting of the old pilots. I will thank you. I will kind of suspend with our normal start, and we'll come back and do that after our speakers. But let me introduce our speakers for today. Most of you are probably familiar with the NASA ASRS, or hopefully you are. I've been using it and looking at it since the 80s at least. I'm curious to when it actually started, so we'll find out. Our two speakers today are Elisa Marfise, who's the program manager for the NASA program, and she's served as the Booz Allen program manager for 5 years, overseeing a 58-person team. She manages the Aviation Safety Reporting System, also known as ASRS, and also the Railroad Incident Reporting System, known as C3RS. So if you want to know anything about conductors and linemen and all that, she can tell you, I guess. And the Confidential Close Call Reporting System, which I don't know anything about. She joined ASRS after graduating from San Jose State University in Flight Operations in 1999, holding research and project manager positions over the last 29 years. She holds a master's in human factors engineering. She's a private pilot and a prior owner of a private archer. And Cynthia and I were lucky enough to have coffee with her last week when she was in town for a wedding for a couple of days, so we couldn't quite get the time right to get her in person here. So you'll get to see her on Zoom today. Also joining Elisa is Ned Kintzing. Ned joined NASA's ASRS program in April of 2016 as an expert analyst and apprentice editor for NASA's ASRS Callback newsletter, assuming the role as senior editor. Ned is a retired Air Force C-141 and C-5 pilot with 24 years of military experience in worldwide operations, including the last days of the Vietnam and First Gulf War. He flew a Boeing 727 for Eastern Airlines and was engineering test pilot for a major defense contractor, as well as serving as their electrical engineer for 14 years between airlines. Ned capped off his flying career to Southwest Airlines with 19 years of service, retiring on the Boeing 737 January of 2016 as captain and check airman. Then joined NASA ASRS and works for Booz Allen Hamilton. Ned has over 21,000 hours of combined flight hours in private, corporate, and commercial airline and flight test operations. An aircraft having 0, 1, 2, is it 0? That's what I guess it's glider. 0, 1, 2, or 3 or 4 engines. He is passionate about flight safety, and challenging his readers. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Lisa, and thank you guys for being here.
All right, great. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
Sound is good?
Yep.
All right. Breakfast looks great.
Wish you were here.
I know. It was beautiful weather. Now we're about to get a bomb cyclone here in the Bay Area. So I'll tell you that going to Steve's house are some NASA stickers and ASRS pens that he was supposed to get today to hand out to everybody, but FedEx is having delays probably with all the weather going on. So teaser for you to attend the next meeting because he'll have them with him. All right, well, we're happy to be here. Thank you for joining us on an early morning here. And I believe probably a lot of you have heard of the Aviation Safety Reporting System, but I'm going to kind of like explain how this program works and what we do once we get the reports. All right, now let me see if I can go to the next slide. Okay, so there's a quick agenda here, give you some history. I love history as well. So how this program got started, which is kind of exciting. I'm now next year, it will be my 30th year working on this program. So spent my whole life around it. And Ned and I are super passionate about safety. So we're excited to be here. Some of the principles of the program, products and services. Ned does need to take off for an appointment. So we've moved up some of his slides about midway through. And then I'm going to go back in and talk about what happens when we get your report, and then why you would report to NASA ASRS, and a final summary of a couple more of our products. So the NASA Aviation Safety Reporting System, or ASRS, is a confidential, voluntary non-punitive system. And many of you may know that pilots can report, but we also get a lot of reports from air traffic controllers, dispatchers, cabin crew, ground ops, maintenance. And just in 2021, we started getting reports on a special form for drone operators. So that's been really interesting, learning all about Part 107 and 135 drone operations. We welcome not only your violations. So a lot of people think of this program as a get out of jail free card. We're trying to steer away from that term, even though I think that's how we all have known it. But we also want to hear about those like accidents waiting to happen, those hazards, not just when you land on the wrong runway, but we want to try to prevent these accidents and future incidents. So we've been around for 48 years and we've already hit 2 million reports. We're tracking to probably be 115,000 to 120,000 reports in 2024. And I always say when people hear those numbers, they think, oh my gosh, this has to be so unsafe. Well, you know, it's because of this amazing culture in aviation that people are willing to share their information, which has made us one of the safest industries. So it's exciting and interesting for all of our team who receive these reports to see how open people are with sharing the safety information. So when in doubt, fill it out. So we haven't always had this healthy safety culture, right, in aviation. And, you know, I've worked a lot with medical error programs. We helped the VA stand up some safety close call reporting. I went to 98 VA hospitals back in the early 2000s, talking to doctors and nurses about reporting their mistakes. We also run this railroad safety system that started in 2011. So I have a whole team of locomotive engineers, dispatchers that work with us and with the pilots. And those cultures, you know, like are growing, but they look at aviation as the model for how well we report this safety information. So something I think we should all be really proud of is that we've been paving the way in safety culture for decades. But ASRS got started in the 70s, and it was due to the crash from TWA 514. And back then, it was an air traffic control phraseology issue. They were coming into land, and air traffic issued a clearance saying you are cleared for the approach. And if you listen to the flight data recorder dialogue between the captain and the first officer, you'll hear them questioning whether or not they're supposed to start their descent yet, and they were in full weather, or if they should maintain to a particular fix and then begin their descent. Well, they were having a conversation, they were descending, and they ended up hitting the mountain, and everyone on board died. Turns out that same clearance had been issued 6 weeks prior for United Airlines flight that wasn't in such severe weather, and they managed to pull up again and not hit the mountain at the last minute. They shared that information within United, but they didn't have a way to share that information with TWA or any of the other airlines that were flying at the time. So a lot of that accident came the result of needing a system that would look at everything from a nationwide perspective. So because of that, we started in 1976. I have a little timeline after this slide, but the premise of the program is under an advisory circular. It was 0046A back then. Now we're all the way to F. We've changed it over the years and expanded it to include like controllers, drone operators, and things. But the FAA asked NASA to run this program on their behalf. So let's look at the timeline. So back in World War II, and like my background is human factors engineering, it was so interesting. The nuclear industry, they're all, you know, a lot of human factors was born out of World War II and the nuclear disaster that happened in 1958. There were hearings saying we need incident data systems with the FAA. Then in 74, the TWA accident happened. United first had the incident, TWA had the accident. And then 75, there were these additional task forces brought together, and FAA started this program. And in May 1975, it was called ASRP. And unfortunately, they realized very quickly that because they were the regulatory agency, that a lot of people didn't necessarily want to report just to the FAA. So then they went out and they looked for an agency that didn't have that like punitive reputation, couldn't pull your certificate, and that people trusted. And so that's when they approached NASA and said, will you run this program on our behalf? So the FAA pays for the program. The Federal Railroad Administration pays for the rail program. They send that money to NASA, and Booz Allen Hamilton is the prime contractor on this contract and has been since 2007. So that money kind of flows through that pathway. And so NASA stood up the program in April 1976. So as I mentioned, it's a voluntary program. There are lots of mandatory systems. This one is, share your story if you're comfortable with us and doing that. So we don't force you to participate. We provide confidentiality protection. I think the thing that I don't like to hear is that it's an anonymous program, because we do ask you to share your name and your address and your phone number with us for a short amount of time, because we may need to call you back before we issue an alert to ask additional questions. So it's not an anonymous system, it's a confidential system where we protect your identity and return that ID strip that you may or may not have ever received in mail. It's non-punitive, and we'll talk a little bit about the waivers later. And it's independent. So again, we're the third party that collects this information, and we protect that from the FAA and from anybody in the public. We protect your names and who you work for, and even down sometimes to what aircraft you were flying. If you were the only aircraft that flies out of that particular airport, our number one priority is confidentiality. So you may have seen pyramids like this. The green and the blue are what we handle, normal operations and incidents. I like to say the NTSB, they handle the accidents and the major injuries, and we are those precursors to those. So that we get a lot of reports to try to prevent accidents. Now, reporting to the system, who can report? I mentioned all the different groups that report to us. Passengers do not report to our system. So that would be kind of the main thing that separates us from another system. And then in general aviation, if most of you are in GA and interested in GA, we get business, corporate, aircraft. There's also something called an ASAP program. So when Ned worked for airlines back in the day, they had these Aviation Safety Action Program. So each airline every night sends their reports encrypted to us, and that's through their ASAP program. So a particular airline has their own internal system, kind of like TWA and United did back in the 70s. But then they send those reports each night to the umbrella system so that we can get the landscape of the whole nation. And air traffic stood up a similar system about 10 years ago. So we saw a big bump in air traffic reports because they started collecting their own, then they look at them, they send them to us. I'll also mention here that last week, right before I met with Steve, we had just had an international meeting. Again, it's all about the safety culture. A lot of other nations have reporting systems just like this, and ASRS was the first of its kind, and we've been the model for Spain, Brazil, Canada, the UK, all over the world have stood up programs similar to this. So we all got to meet in San Francisco last week, and I really enjoyed that because now we're sharing information on an international basis of the things that we're seeing and collecting and helping new countries stand up their own programs. So that's really rewarding as well. All right, so why should you report? Again, don't just report your violations. We want to hear about unsafe occurrences, situations, that there's a tree that is in the way as I'm landing at this airport. I'm afraid in the future someone might hit it, those sorts of things. And we get a lot of near mid-air collisions, a lot of airspace violations, and then we issue alerts. And so a good majority of our alerts are to airports. So airport signage, strange taxiway, paint or faded paint, various things like that. We work with Jeppesen, we work with Boeing, lots of other major industry stakeholders to try to make corrections to safety issues. Okay, when should I report? So I often get this question. They're like, oh, I can only exercise my waiver one time in 5 years. So that means I should only report one time in 5 years. Well, that's not really the case, because exercising this immunity waiver is such a rare occurrence. So there's no limit to the number of reports you can submit to us. What's important to do is to send it in within 10 days of the violation, or when you became aware of the violation. Sometimes, a plane can take off from California. There's a screwdriver somewhere within an engine or something. It goes across the country and lands in JFK 2 days later. And then the maintenance technician realized they should have taken that, cleaned up their work. So when you become aware of the violation, report it within 10 days. And then your waiver is only good once every 5 years. So you can report as many times as you like. We'll talk a little bit more about this after Ned talks. Okay, so other than the ASAP programs where they come in each night, and those are in droves, like we get all the airlines, and all the air traffic reports that they collect on their own individual. But you can also just go to our website and report electronically. We have 5 different forms, and you can fill those out, and you can hit submit, and it comes to us every day. If you're not comfortable submitting electronically, you can download and print it, send it to this address, and that's when you put your own stamp on it. Or if you're like me and learned to fly and your flight instructor handed you a paper NASA form, but you kept it in your flight bag, we still have postage paid legal size ASRS forms that you can fill out. And if you guys want them, I'm happy to send them to you, but they're usually, at FBOs and things like that. So lots of options for reporting. We used to, you talk about how Southwest Airlines was born on a paper napkin. We would probably we want the doors to be open. You can send it in paper. You can send it by carrier pigeon. You can write it on a napkin. We're going to take it and learn from it. All right, Ned, you're up. Oh, you're on mute. I'm going to mute myself too.
All right. Can everybody hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, great. So before we even start, I just want to say thank you very much for having us here. It's a pleasure to talk to you folks and to share what we do. So with that, I like to do one or two things a little differently maybe, but I like to be a little interactive with the crowd. So first off, I have a question. How many of you, and let me see a show of hands. I can see on a screen here for, but how many of you are somewhat familiar with ASRS and have submitted a report in the past? Not as many as maybe as I would have thought. So regardless, okay, so thank you for that. But so we'll continue on now. But my situation, or my part of this presentation begins with how to report. And what you see on the screen now is a kind of 3 sections here of the electronic reporting form. We have at the top, like Elisa said, it's not really anonymous, but it is all de-identified. So up in the top left part of this slide is the ID strip section. It's the identification. It's where you put your name, your phone number in case we need to call back and get any more information, and your contacts and so forth. Dates of occurrence, what it is this slip gets removed from your report when we are finished with the report and we file the report away. This strip gets removed and sent to you, and you receive it as your proof of this incident if you are ever called to talk about it to any regulating bodies, let's say. So make sure you fill that out so we can get in touch with you. The next section down here in the center is it's kind of like an electronic ballot. All you have to do is click and fill in the squares, but it's the event section. And what it does is it collects data for us. You describe situations where you tell about yourself, what your qualification is, what your job was that day, your position, what kind of certificates you hold, what the weather is like when the incident occurs, what kind of airspace you're in, what equipment you're flying, location, and so forth. And there are many different categories here that you fill in. So, and what we like to see is as much information as is practical and important for teaching others. So I'll get to that in a little bit. And so the third section is down here, is the narrative section, and where it says, tell us your story. So in this section here, there's a very important quote, and it comes up. It's a quote by Charlie Billings, who was one of the founding fathers of ASRS back in '76 or so. And it really captures the philosophy of why we do this. It says the usefulness of incident reporting lies in the insights that can be gained from careful study of the narratives submitted in all their contextual richness. And that's an important phrase, in all their contextual richness, not in the quantitative knowledge that one can gain from counting adverse events. So we're not just, it's not a scorecard. We are actually trying to capture incidents that occur so that we can share them vicariously with all who are interested in order to prevent things like what happened at TWA 514 in the most extreme case, but many other things as well. So this is the report. And it's an easy process to do. Like Elisa said, it's right on the website, and the website is very user-friendly. So take advantage of that. For pilots, you'll see up here in the top on the right side of this particular chart, we have 5 different types of submissions. Pilots use a general report form, unless you're associated with an airline, but by the name of your group, I'm guessing that no one is any longer. At any rate, pilots use the general report form. And of course, we have controllers, maintenance, flight attendant, cabin report forms, and of course, the newer UAS business. So back down to this lower right-hand corner. Tell us your story. The story has to be a good story. And by that, I mean it has to do a couple of things. And let's flip to the next chart. Okay, so stories can be the narratives, the stories you tell, can be bare bones, or they can be rich in context. And the bare bones, generally, when you're in an English class, your first English class, the instructor, the teacher said, who, what, when, where, and why. Answer those questions. And that's really what we want. This kind of just points out an example where we have insufficient information, and there's nothing really to be learned from that, where the questions who, when, where, why are not really answered very well. On the other side, on the right side of this chart, is a much better report where those, the 5 questions are answered and add a lot of context and add a lot of detail to the story so that one can glean what happened, what went wrong, maybe why it went wrong, what we can do about it, how to prevent it, how to mitigate it if we can't prevent it, how to reduce the consequences, and we can pass that on. So we ask that when you submit a report, that you don't take it lightly, but treat it as something as you're going to teach someone from your experience. You learned, best what happened. So teach what you learned and put it in a good format. One of the things I like to tell guys and girls is that, you go for an interview, and when you're describing a situation that happened to you in flight or related some way, there's a very basic format called situation, action, and results. And you set up the situation, you describe what action you took, and then you describe the results that occurred. In that, if you use that format and you answer the 5 questions, who, what, when, where, and why, it will be a good report. So keep that in mind when we do that. Some of our products and services are highlighted on this page. We put out, I'm going to mostly talk about the newsletter, but the callback newsletter. I will touch a little bit on the database and just a real quick on the other 3, but our alert messages are things that we may get something that's very important, which needs immediate attention, and it would warrant direct contact with some agency or company. It can be a company, it can be a government agency that can do something about the problem. Let's say we get a report where a VASI system does not correspond with the actual visual approach, or it's out of calibration, or maybe it's way off from the electronic glide slope or something like that, where it could really throw ambiguity into an approach. Well, that might warrant something like an alert. It could be something, an engine problem, multiple problems in turbine blades, or anything. It could be really any type of problem that would warrant an immediate response. We do send alert messages to agencies and corporations like manufacturers, part manufacturers, government agencies, and so forth. That's the alerts. Quick responses. This is generally will be a response to a government agency that wants a quick answer to a question like, how do you see this type of incident? Is it growing? Is it decreasing? What's happening? During COVID, the FAA administrator asked for some pertinent information about how COVID changed things, where of course nobody in this room had ever, or on this call, had ever experienced anything like COVID before. But so we wanted to know how to combat that. So we had a few quick responses for that kind of thing. Jumping over here to focus studies, we do have 2 focus studies that we continually track, and that is hazardous materials incidents and wake turbulence incidents, wake vortices. So those are ongoing, and you can see those. So the newsletter, Callback, I'm a Callback editor, and that is our monthly product that we put out. It's NASA's Aviation Safety Newsletter, essentially. And it consists of actually reports that you send us. And I'll get into that in the next slide a little bit. But it also takes those reports during our processes. We take those reports, and Elisa may talk about this in a little bit, but part of the thing we do with the reports is we categorize those, and we put them in a repository in a public database where you actually have access to them. And you can go on our website and you can find those, and you can read any one that's on there. So I guess that's enough about that. Let's flip to the next chart now.
Okay.
Okay, so our Callback newsletter is strictly aviation. And like I said, it's NASA's monthly aviation safety newsletter. These 3 pictures here depict kind of 3 eras. Our first issue was back in July of 1979, kind of looked like the one on the left. We used to get the little blue forms. Those of you that raised their hands, did you used to get the little blue pieces of paper that came in the mail?
Yep.
So you're aware of that. Let's back up one. There we go. Okay, so the center one, we first started issuing on posting to the website, where you can find them on our website, in December of '94. And the one on the right is kind of what it looks like today. That represents one of our formats, but we'll get to that in just a second. So that kind of represents what they look like now. But back to what it is. We say it's our monthly aviation safety newsletter, but I like to think of it as a textbook, kind of a 2-page textbook on case studies of what happens in the airline industry and general aviation, not just airlines, but all aviation, all U.S. aviation. So with that philosophy of Charlie Billings a couple slides ago, we look at the contextual richness. We try to extract what is important, lessons that we can share with others that haven't made the same mistakes. Again, judging by your name, old pilots, I'm guessing that a few of you have made some mistakes in the air in the past. I know I have, and I've written hundreds of these things that sent into NASA. Well, it really went through an airline, but I've written many of these things. So we ask you to participate in the same way. But it's really a text on turning our weaknesses that we can share, or to in the spirit of helping others not make the same mistakes that we do. We want to turn those, help educate, turn those mistakes into non-mistakes, into so that they're prevented in the future. You know, there's not enough time in a lifetime to make all the mistakes. So we have to gather from everybody, and we kind of share things so that the younger folks coming up hopefully won't make the same mistakes, at least the bad ones. So we use real incidents that you report, and in producing Callback, I actually extract those reports from our DBOL, which is our database online, and you have access to that. So it's real incidents that we get, and it's actual errors and mistakes that are made. The who, what, when, where, and why is also bi-directional. When you write your story, that's what we want to see: who, what, when, where, and why, with a good lesson to it. When you read Callback as a reader, or when you go and search the DBOL, our database online, for topical studies or a particular one, a particular type of incident, you look for who, what, when, where, and why. You're not going to see the who because it's de-identified, and you might not see, sometimes you might not see the where, but the what, when, and the why will be enough to for you to hopefully sit down together, either or ponder yourselves, but sit down together and bounce among yourselves the good ideas, the bad ideas, what happened, why, maybe what was missing. You don't always get all the information you'd like, but you can fill in the blanks because there's an infinite number of permutations how these things can go. You know that, you know, when you have flown, one little factor that changed or would have changed maybe what you did, or maybe the outcome of the situation. So there are all kinds of things that you can extrapolate from these reports, and you only do that when you share each other. We sharpen each other when we talk and argue and debate and try and grasp at what's important and what isn't, and how we solve these problems. So keep that in mind when you're reporting. Keep that in mind when you're reading. Our formats, we have a couple formats. Every month is a topic, and those topics are selected by suggestion. I look at things, I make suggestions, management gets involved. We kind of manipulate this list, and we come up with a list of topics and so forth. And I'm gonna tap you for that in a little bit also. But it's usually a monthly topic. It's always lessons learned. Personally, I like to challenge the readers. I like to tease the reader in a way, particularly in the introduction to each individual narrative. Usually, each narrative usually gets an introduction, small one, along with the major one in the on the paper. But I like to somehow tease the reader into wanting to read the rest of the report, in that what there is to learn and what we can gain by it. What would you have done? The WWYHD stands for what would you have done? That's been a well-received format that we do generally twice a year. And we're going to look at that on the next two slides. Not yet though, but we're going to look at that in the next two slides. And it's also represented by the little callback on the right side of this chart here. And then we added fairly recently, a couple years ago, a human factor series. NASA's ASRS program we have many human factors experts. Elisa is one of them. Our program director is one of them. We have lots of human factors experts beyond the flyers' expertise in the real world, but we have very good human factors business, and we have 11 uniquely identified human factors that we assign to different situations, human factors that occurred in an incident, things that may have, caused or contributed to an incident. So we began a couple years ago a periodic. It's not super regular, but it's maybe 3 times every 2 years, a human factor series where we publish reports on one of the human factors. And human factors are things like confusion, distraction, situational awareness, training, things like that. The human things that affect your performance. We're going to look at an actual example in the next 2 slides. And this ACN number, ACN is accession or access, like access to the files, but accession number is 174-64292. And those are just the numbers that we assign when we receive the reports. And at the end of my slides, which are 2 or 3 more, I'll say 1 or 2 words about future topics, topics that we may show up in next year in 2025. And then, since I do have to run in a while, I may field some questions if there's time for that. If Elisa, you think there's time for that, if a question or 2 has popped up. So, but we'll do that at the end of my slides. So let's go on to the next one. Okay, so this is a what would you have done issue. It's a couple years old, back in September 2022. And some of you may have experienced something like this, but what we do is divide up a report into 2 parts. The first section we call the first half of the report. And the second section we call what would you have done, or the rest of the story, actually. So we break the story up at a place where a decision has to be made, an immediate action has to be done, or at a place where you decide that a critical system or something has to be actively managed, something like that. Basically, where a decision has to be made. So in this story, the reporter says he was piloting command, the only person on board. On his turn from downwind to final, I noticed my airspeed was at 60 knots, so I took action to increase the speed. In the course of doing this, I found that when I turned to final, I was too high. I put the aircraft into a slip to get down. Anybody ever do that? Yeah, I've done it. Yeah, everybody's done it. When I rounded out of the slip, I was over the runway numbers and doing 79 knots. So
Ed,
what would you have done? At this point, you ask yourself, what would you have done? You stop, you kick it around, and with your friends you're chair flying with, or hanger flying, whatever you're doing, and you have a discussion. You think about the factors that are listed. Sometimes you don't have all the information, like we said, but you kick it around between everybody. You come up, what do you think the right thing to do is? What do these guys do? You click on this little where it says, what would you have done? In the electronic form, it takes you right to the next, to the answer, to the second half of the story, and it shows what the reporter then did.
Ed,
So let's flip. Yes.
question.
Yes.
That's all great, but it depends whether that's a 150 or a 747.
You're right. You're right. You're right. And so you're absolutely right. I'm glad actually that you brought that up, because it forces you to make that determination one way or the other. And in your case, you're going to make a different call, whether it's one or the other. Who knows? You're probably going to do that. Well, you're not going to be at 79 knots in a 747, I guarantee you. So at any rate,
Or you got a bigger problem. You're parking.
got a bigger problem, is right. But what that does is it forces you then to go back into the database, because that type of airplane is usually presented or usually reported and may or may not be in the narrative. So he may report the type of airplane in that. Remember the second section there in the reporting form where you clicked all the data about the incident? Part of that includes the aircraft, the type, and so forth. So the richness comes, and you're right about that, exactly, and it's a good point. But it gives you opportunity and cause to go back into the database to look up the original report and find out which one it was, if you so desire. But you can do that. And most of the times, the type of aircraft is reported. So, and for this one, I'll tell you what it was in a little bit. So here's the landing decision. This is what the guy did, guy or girl. You may agree with it. There are no right or wrong answers. There are no, we don't ever throw any shade on a situation or quantify the value of the decision, in a sense. Or in other words, we don't call out something as good or bad. We don't pronounce judgment on anything. We just present what is and what occurred. So he says, I should have gone around, instead made the bad decision to try and force the plane onto the runway. When I touched down before the midway point, I was still too fast and locked up the brakes. This resulted in a sideways skid into the grass on the left side of the runway, 30 feet into the grass. No damage to the airplane or injury to me. I taxied back to the hangar for inspection. Maintenance confirmed no damage. Looking back now, I should have just gone around after I was not happy with my downwind to base turn. So this gives you a chance to, in your minds, to evaluate what the reporter did and then think about what you might have done differently. Now, if you had gone back into the database, the rest of those things, those items that the reporter had clicked on to describe the event are listed there. And I'll just read a few of them. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I will share a couple of them. This report was back in June of 2020. The incident occurred between noon and 1800 local time. It was a U.S. reference airport, and it's identified as ZZZ, so it's de-identified. This location is de-identified. VMC conditions, 10 miles visibility, daylight, and the aircraft make and model was either reported or was set this way as a small aircraft. So it is your small Piper, your small Cessna, and so forth. It's not the 747, which we all knew that anyways. But anyway, under Part 91 and so forth. It goes on and on and on. I won't bore you with those rest of those details. But you can actually find that. And here's how. Elisa, run back one more slide backwards right now, if you would. Thank you. So the easiest way to find one of these reports in our database is to do a search, and the searches they're fairly easy. There's a little bit of tutorials on the website, and honestly, the website is fairly easy to navigate. But the way I found this one, other than I knew which one it was because this happened on my shift back in 2022, but I didn't do it that way. I took something that would identify this particular report. So in reading this setup in the problem, he makes a statement here. He says, I was over the runway numbers and doing 79 knots. Well, you look at that statement and the fact that he's doing 79 knots on the numbers, and you think, how many people do 79 knots on the numbers and make the statement in this particular way? So all I did was search on that particular string. I put in there, I had the computer search for, I was over the runway numbers and doing 79 knots. And this is all on the website, and it spit me out one report, and this was the one. So it's fairly easy to identify reports that way. Okay, Elisa, let's go on one more, please. And there we go. Okay, so I think this is my last one, but that's a quick summary of what we do with the callback issue. I want to reiterate that it's a two-way street. The participation is bi-directional. You give to us, we process, we formulate, we store in the database, we evaluate, and then we give back to you in this particular publication, Callback. This one's a one on wake turbines, and that's one of our special topics there. But at any rate, it's a monthly publication. As you can probably tell, I'm passionate about safety and about constant improvement, sharing demanding the best that you can get out of yourself and out of your machine. The subscription's free. It's easy to sign up. Point your camera at this QR code now or sometime, or just go to the website and it's a piece of cake to sign up. I like to think of these numbers over here. This is our readership in some way. In 2024, through our email subscriptions right now, number 33,674. So every month we send out 33,674 emails with the callback in it. And many of you probably get it. And if you don't, I would encourage you to sign up. In addition to that, we have two other formats that are available on the website. We have a PDF version, which is available to download. And we also have the web version, the HTML version. And for 2023, we had almost 742,000 clicks on the reviews for those. So if you do the math, I like to think of it as we get almost 34,000 a month out of the email, and another 66,000 or so a month out of the views for the HTML and the PDF version. That's almost 95,000. It's over 95,000 if there's no overlap. There may be some overlap, but it's nice to think of it as without. And you look, it's 95,000 views, people looking at the product each month. We hope we have some influence and impact on the safety of flight among all aviators, young or old, doesn't matter the hours, doesn't matter the experience, doesn't matter your age. So with that, I'll finish with a little bit of the future in the 2025 topics. And then if Elisa says we have enough time, I'll take a question or two. It's up to her. But in the future, we hope to continue improve this product, just like we continually improve ourselves as pilots and our performance there. As far as topics for 2025, we are in process now to determine those. But I would ask, this is another interactive piece here. I'm going to ask, you say there's 40 of you in the room. We could probably get, if you each had 4 or 5 suggestions for topics, things you would like to see, things maybe that you have not seen, would like to, or things that you think are important. Steve said that he would be our secretary on site and collect those and then get them to us. So if you have any suggestions, please give them to Steve and he will pass them on. We will consider those in the mix for topics for 2025 and or beyond, even perhaps beyond 2025, but at least for 2025 now, because we are in process for those. So with that, Elisa, your call. Do I have time for a question or no?
Yeah, I would say in all the presentations I've done, it's special to have Ned be part of it. He's like our cameo appearance. So to meet the callback editor is kind of exciting. So yeah, if anybody had any questions for Ned.
I would be happy to attempt to answer them.
I'll go around the room, but I have one. I mean, if there's about 500,000 or 600,000 pilots in the US, I'm really surprised that there's only 33,000 subscriptions. I've been subscribing to this since it first came out, and I think it's great. So how come you have such a small percentage of pilots?
I have the exact same question. I wish it were bigger. So I can't answer that directly other than say I have noticed the same thing. But it is what it is. If it's 95,000, tags a month, maybe some of them share with their friends and they haven't subscribed. I don't know. How many people in the room? How many out of 40 of you folks? How many out of you are subscribers now? I don't need an answer, but is that percentage also low? I don't know. But
yeah, how many by tomorrow?
By tomorrow, yeah, it ought to be 100% by tomorrow, right?
Several just signed up now, but yes, I know I may be one of the only subscribers. Nobody raised their hands. Yeah. 2 or 3. So, all right, let me,
Well, I hope, yeah, I hope we can instill you, or at least that I hope to help to instill you to subscribe. And Elisa can do that for the rest of the talk. Any others? Any other questions?
Who has a question? Okay.
Curious as to whether you're getting an increase in the number of reports over the years, or whether it's kind of tapered off, you know.
I'm sorry, could you?
I'll repeat it. Has the number of reports gone up over the years, or is it tapering off, or is it staying fairly level?
No, it goes up. I have a quick summary here, just a couple years, which I can share just a moment.
Yeah, well, I was looking at, obviously, both the rail and the aviation industry suffered during the pandemic. So that's probably the only time in the history that I've been around that we saw a dip. And then it came back full force. Now we're at pre-COVID levels and more, you know, so many more people are traveling. There's so much more flight ops going on. But yeah, this will be a banner year for sure. The most reports we have ever seen in 2024. 106,000 in 2023. I think when I started, we were getting in the 90s, so 30, 40,000 a year. And the ASAP programs at the airlines started in the 90s, and we started those partnerships. So that bumped up our reports. And then when the ATSAP for air traffic started, then that was another big bump. And I think that was like early 2000s. So
Okay, we have one more question over here.
Sure.
Great presentation. Is there any way, or have you attempted to take this confidential reporting system database and feed it back specifically to how the NTSB does their work, or to how FAA works regulations?
I'm sorry, to do
Have
what
you-
with the database, to do something with the database? What was that?
Have you taken the ASRS database and worked it backwards into the NTSB and or FAA database to coordinate and align?
That's in my experience, in my tenure and in my responsibilities, the answer is no, but qualified no, in at least partially, because we do incidents and stop at accidents. We don't do accidents. We only do incidents. Elisa, if you have any more insight into that, I don't, you know, that's more, if not, then I have not seen any integration with that myself, but that's.
So a couple parts of that would be, you know, we really try to not encourage people to connect like the flight data recorder information or the air traffic control radar tapes things to try to extrapolate, because then you start to figure out potentially who the reporter is, which is so why we kind of keep our database as carefully locked down and de-identified as we do. So there's that. But I think what I have found interesting is I did a study back late 90s where we took the chain of events of NTSB accidents in helicopters, and we looked at incidents for helicopters, and we tried to kind of line up to the point where the accident kept going in the chain and the incident, what kept it from becoming a more serious event or a serious accident. And I found that really interesting to kind of look at the steps and see what someone did to intervene, whether it was automation or humans that intervened, pulled up before they hit the mountain. You know, what was that moment where they kept from hitting terrain or from something more serious? And the chain, because we're all human and we all make mistakes, can be very similar, right? Until somebody did something to correct the issue. So we've done a little bit of that. Haven't, you know, had the budget to really go in and like look at that on a grander scale, but it's been kind of an interesting exercise.
Okay, any other questions? Oh, we have Gary who sent you that old callback. Here, stand over here, I think, and see you.
Yeah, speaking to the camera.
Speak right in there.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can see your,
We-
oh, there
yeah,
you go. Hi.
Houston, we have you. Yeah, we do.
Okay, so I have a callback from 1987. Anyone wants to take a look at it, one of the ones I reported to. I'm glad to see that callback is still going on. You guys are doing a great job. Thank you very much. You go pass it around.
Here you go, got an antique here.
That's it. Yeah.
That, and that's the one we put in the presentation.
Uh,
So,
Hard copy.
obviously we don't send you a t-shirt that says I reported, right? Because it's a confidential program. But I appreciate you standing up and saying that was yours. It's funny because I've been at Oshkosh over the years. People come up and say, "Oh, that was my report in the newsletter," but we can't. We'll never know for sure. And you'd be surprised how many people might report on the same event. So anyway, I can't say for sure it was your report, but I think it's neat that we featured it if that was the case. But again, confidential system.
I think the t-shirt's a really good idea, Lisa, actually.
Look,
you might get a
only
lot
gonna
more
get
reports that way.
you're only getting a sticker and a pen next meeting if you come up with ideas for Ned, because
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, we gotta work our way up for swag.
yeah.
So
right,
in all seriousness, thank you, gentlemen. And if there's any, I don't see any ladies in the audience, but there's
There are several, actually,
Yes, there's one I see now. But thank you all,
There's one.
and I appreciate, it's
Hi,
been a
Cynthia.
pleasure to be able to talk with you. If there's no further questions for me, I will give it back to Elisa, and in just a little bit, I'm going to have to leave.
Thank you, Ned.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thanks a
So
lot.
can I do about 10 more minutes? I don't want to, keep you guys from your rest of your breakfast. What do we-
Any other questions for either Ed or Elisa? All right, I guess we'll let you go, and thank you so much for the presentation, and we'll look forward to welcoming you back to the Valley one day. By the way, I know you have the bomb cyclone up there and it's raining and windy, but the palm trees are not even swaying, and it's supposed to be 85 here today. So wish you were here.
I know, us too.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Much.
All right, thanks again for
All
the
right.
great presentation.
Have a great rest of your meeting. All right.
All right, thanks a lot, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, we'll finish up with the meeting here, and yeah, so we have a poster. If you sign that on the way out.